Hello and welcome to this explainer for your Anglais Monde Contemporain course. Today, we are diving headfirst into a really critical modern issue. It perfectly illustrates our current axes of study, the promises and the challenges of science and technology. And we're going to be focusing specifically on the weaponization of space.
Okay, let's kick things off with this really powerful statement from one of our sources. What it's basically saying is that for decades, we've kind of accepted military activities in space as normal, but that very acceptance has created a slippery slope, one that's pushing us towards putting actual weapons up there. This idea is going to be absolutely central to our analysis today. So this is the big question guiding us today. We're going to explore the surprising historical role space tech played in keeping the peace, and then we'll dig into why that stability is now under threat. And that'll lead us to ask, are our old rules still fit for purpose?
Now, we're tackling this question right within your AMC curriculum. This fits perfectly into Theme 1, Savoir, Création, Innovation, and more specifically, Axis 2, Science and Techniques, Promises and Defeats. So we'll start by looking at the promise of space tech for world peace, and then we'll get into the current challenge, this new arms race.
Okay, before we go any further, getting this distinction is absolutely crucial. Militarization means using space for support. So think GPS guiding troops on the ground, or spy satellites watching things. Weaponization, on the other hand, is about putting actual weapons in space. Let me give you an analogy. Militarization is like having security cameras all around a building. They're just for observation. Weaponization is putting armed guards on the roof with orders to shoot. See the difference? It's a huge shift from passive support to active threat.
Right, let's dive into the history. Because for a long time, the militarization of space, those eyes in the sky, was actually seen as a force for good. It was a genuine promise of technology that helped prevent a global catastrophe. How on earth did that work? Let's find out. This timeline tells a really fascinating story. Back in the 1960s, American Corona satellites could literally see Soviet missile sites from space. This gave the US the confidence it needed to actually sit down and negotiate. This eyes-in-the-sky capability became the foundation for huge arms control treaties, like the Outer Space Treaty and the SALT and START agreements, which limited nuclear weapons for decades. And the key concept here, the official term, was National Technical Means, or NTM. This was just the formal name for the satellites that let the superpowers watch each other without sending in spies. It was a super high-tech way to solve the problem of trust. It boiled down to this: I'll stick to the deal because I know you can see me if I try to cheat. So here's the bottom line. These eyes in the sky weren't weapons themselves. They were verification tools, and they created this stable balance of power because both sides knew they couldn't get away with cheating. This was the great promise of space technology. All right, let's fast forward to today and see how this very same technology and its much more advanced descendants are now creating a massive challenge. That whole era of strategic stability, well, it's facing a very serious test. This slide just shows you the dramatic reversal. During the Cold War, satellites built trust. Today, the ability to destroy those very same satellites creates deep mistrust and instability. All of a sudden, these critical military assets are seen as vulnerable targets, which you can imagine dramatically increases the risk that a conflict on Earth could escalate into space, and fast. And this slide shows us why that shift is happening. We're talking about the development of anti-satellite weapons, both on the ground and in space. Combine that with powerful AI that can analyze massive amounts of data to find hidden targets. And all of this is being backed up by new military doctrines that basically treat space as just another battlefield, like land, sea, or air. This quote really gets to the heart of the danger. For decades, peace was basically kept because of something called second strike capability. The idea was, even if you were hit by a surprise nuclear attack, you could always strike back with your hidden submarines or mobile missile launchers. It was the ultimate insurance policy. But what happens when new sensor tech and AI can find those hiding spots? That's the problem. This leads to what one of our sources calls a standstill conundrum. It's a tricky situation. If a country starts to fear that its ultimate insurance policy, its second strike capability, is at risk, it will do anything to protect it. That might mean building defenses or, even more dangerously, developing weapons to blind the enemy's satellites first. You can see how this creates a really vicious cycle of escalation, right? So we've seen the promise and we've seen the challenge. It's a pretty complex issue.
Now, let's switch gears and focus on a practical skill for your assessments. How do you take all of this complicated information and turn it into a clear, persuasive argument that's going to impress your examiner?
The key really is the structured paragraph method. I want you to just burn these 3 simple steps into your brain: idea, example, explanation. This structure makes sure your analysis is always logical, it's always well supported, and it directly answers the question. Let's walk through it together.
First, you state your core idea. It should be a single, clear sentence that just summarizes the point you're about to make. Something like this: new technologies threaten the strategic stability that was once provided by reconnaissance satellites. Simple, direct, perfect.
Next, you back it up. Find a specific example from the documents. A direct quote is often the best way to go. Here we're using that quote we just talked about, which perfectly illustrates our idea about threatened stability. And finally, and this is the most important part, you have to explain the link. You analyze how your example proves your idea. You've got to connect the dots for the examiner. Show them you understand the significance of the evidence and how it all ties back to our main question about needing new laws. And listen, to make your arguments even stronger, especially when you're speaking, you need to master this vocabulary. Using terms like strategic instability, verification, and counterspace systems accurately and confidently, well, it shows a really deep understanding of the topic. So, let's pull all these threads together now and go back to the question we started with. Do we actually need new laws for space? Well, our analysis has traced a pretty clear story, hasn't it? We've gone from the promise of satellites as tools for peace and stability during the Cold War, all the way to the challenge they represent today as potential targets in a whole new era of strategic competition. So, the verdict from our sources is clear. The Outer Space Treaty of 1967, which was written before any of these modern technologies even existed, is just not enough anymore. The answer to our guiding question is a pretty resounding yes. The international community urgently needs to come up with new rules to stop space from becoming the next battlefield. And that leaves us with one final, really thought-provoking question. Back in the 1960s, space law was basically written by 2 superpowers. But today, with dozens of countries and incredibly powerful private companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin all operating in space, who gets a seat at the table now? Who has the power to define the future? And that, well, that opens up entirely new themes of power and global governance for us to explore next.